The sound of splashing hit my ears before I'd even taken my first sip of coffee. Not the light, happy splashes of kids playing in a pool. No, this sounded industrial. Aggressive. Like someone was launching water from a cannon into a crater. I squinted across my backyard and nearly dropped my mug. There, beyond my fence, was a half-dug pit, and inside it were 2 workers in orange vests spraying down what looked like rebar with a hose. I blinked hard. Was I still dreaming? The kicker? The pit extended 3/4 onto my land. I wasn't just watching a pool get built, I was watching a pool get built on my property. I stormed toward the fence in my slippers, half expecting this to be some surreal prank show. But no, it was real. And when I shouted over the roar of the cement mixer and asked who authorized this, one of the workers casually pointed toward my neighbor's yard and said, "The lady with the smoothie." That's when I knew I was in for the stupidest war of my life. It all started 2 days before, when my wife and I noticed survey flags poking out of the dirt near the side fence. I'd thought they were utility markers. That's what Karen, our next-door neighbor, had told me when I saw her pacing the fence line with a clipboard. "Oh, just getting ready for some basic garden work," she had said with a syrupy smile, adjusting her oversized sunglasses. "You don't mind, do you?" I had no reason to doubt her, though I probably should have, considering she once called code enforcement on us for having offensive garden gnomes, which, for the record, were just regular gnomes wearing baseball caps. Karen was the type of neighbor who printed rules that didn't exist and then handed them out like she was passing out blessings from the HOA god. So I had my suspicions, but nothing prepared me for waking up to a full construction crew chewing into my yard with jackhammers and excavators. By noon, it was confirmed. Karen was building an in-ground pool. The problem? She only had enough space on her side to build a glorified bathtub. So what did she do? She decided to borrow some land. Mine. Without asking. Without warning. Without a single shred of logic. When I confronted her, she didn't just brush me off, she insulted me. "I assumed you'd be grateful," she said as if she were doing me a favor. "It'll raise your property value too. Pools are hot right now." She waved toward the pit like she was showcasing a new attraction at a luxury resort. I told her, as calmly as I could manage while clenching my fists in my robe, that she needed to stop the project immediately. Her response? "You weren't even using that part of your yard. It was just dirt and weeds." I almost choked. "Dirt and weeds," she said. I had just planted wildflowers along that edge the previous weekend. Still trying to keep things civil, I walked her through the property survey document. I pointed at the markers I'd installed last year when I replaced the fence and showed her the legal description. She didn't even glance at them. "I saw an old neighborhood flyer from the 90s, she said smugly. "It had a different layout. Property lines are flexible, you know. They evolve." That's when I realized I wasn't dealing with an annoying neighbor, I was dealing with a delusional tyrant in yoga pants. And apparently, she thought homeowners' rights were like interpretive dance, open to creative reinterpretation. I called the county zoning office. The man on the line, Todd, sounded half amused, half horrified when I explained the situation. "Wait, someone is building a pool that straddles your land without permission?" he repeated. "And they think that's okay?" He promised to flag the permit for review and told me to take pictures, keep notes, and maybe even install a few discreet cameras. "It won't take long for this to blow up," he said. I just didn't know how big the explosion would be yet. That afternoon, I took Todd's advice and set up 3 security cameras along the fence. I labeled every photo I took of the progress, time-stamped every movement, and even started a folder called Karen's Chaos on my desktop. It felt ridiculous, like I was preparing for court over something straight out of a sitcom. But when a neighbor told me Karen was boasting on the HOA forum that she was beautifying the whole block with her visionary pool project, I realized this wasn't just about stolen land. It was about control. Karen wanted to make an example out of me. By Friday, the construction had kicked into high gear. Trucks rolled in with concrete, pipes were laid, and a deck outline was being traced in chalk. I tried to speak with the foreman, but he told me he was just following orders from the paying client. When I pointed out that the paying client didn't own the land, he shrugged and said, "Take it up with her, buddy." So I did. I knocked on Karen's front door again, documents in hand. She opened it just wide enough for me to smell her coconut-scented candle and see the smug grin plastered on her face. "If you have a problem," she said, "talk to the HOA. This isn't your decision." As it turned out, she had roped the HOA into this madness too. She was planning to hold an emergency vote to authorize shared yard development, as if a group of unqualified neighbors could just rewrite private property rights. She even forged a fake email that claimed I'd offered the land as a gift for community improvement. When I saw the screenshot, I nearly laughed. The timestamp was from a day I'd been in a different state, with GPS receipts to prove it. I sent a cease and desist letter that night, drafted by my friend who's a property attorney. Karen tore it up in front of her lawn camera and posted the video to the HOA message board with the caption, "Someone's scared of a little water." But what she didn't know was that I wasn't scared, I was preparing. While she was dreaming up poolside cocktails, I was consulting with zoning officials, legal experts, and an old concrete contractor I once helped during a home remodel. I wasn't just going to fight back. I was going to end this entire fiasco with the same thing she started it with: cement. Only this time, it wasn't going in the pool the way she planned. Because when you dig into someone else's land, you better make sure they're not an engineer who owns 3 spare trucks of fast-drying concrete, and a sense of humor that's rapidly running out of patience. The following morning, I stood in my backyard, coffee in hand, watching as Karen's construction crew wheeled in a fresh load of tiles for the pool's edge. There was a certain audacity in how casually they moved across my property, like it belonged to them. One worker even asked me to move a bag of soil that was blocking the way, completely ignoring the bright orange boundary markers I'd set up the day before. I didn't respond. I just pointed toward the survey stakes and walked back inside. Something in me had shifted. I'd spent the past few days being stunned, frustrated, and borderline amused. But now I was focused. I wasn't going to let this escalate into a full-scale circus, but I also wasn't going to sit back and let my land be annexed by a woman who thought Pinterest posts and motivational yoga quotes made her a real estate mogul. I spent most of that day finalizing every piece of legal documentation I had. I went down to the county clerk's office in person and retrieved the official land parcel maps, printed in duplicate. I met with a local property attorney, Mr. Hopkins, who had the kind of dry, sarcastic demeanor that made you feel like everything was under control even when it wasn't. After a quick review, he looked up and said, "Yeah, she's cooked. No way this survives in court." But that wasn't the win I wanted. I didn't just want her to stop. I wanted her to realize she'd messed with the wrong person. By midweek, Karen pulled another stunt. This time, she hosted an impromptu HOA community walkthrough around the construction site. About 10 people showed up, holding lemonade cups and following her around like she was the queen of a new development. She spoke loudly about upgrading shared spaces and how this modern aquatic enhancement would benefit the neighborhood's property values. I stood at the edge of my fence and watched in silence. At one point, she gestured toward me and said, "Some people are hesitant, but once it's done, they'll thank me." A few of the HOA members nodded politely, though one older couple looked visibly confused and whispered to each other while glancing at my fence line. I wasn't surprised when I received a certified letter the next day stating that the HOA had voted 6-4 to approve limited communal use of backyard boundary zones for structural improvements that benefit neighborhood cohesion. It sounded official. It looked official. But legally, it was nonsense. Homeowners associations can regulate community rules, but they can't override private land deeds or annex property just because a few clipboard warriors say it's okay. I knew that, Mr. Hopkins knew that, and the county definitely knew that. But Karen was banking on the confusion. If she could build fast enough and drag out the inevitable legal backlash, she figured I'd give up and accept the pool as a permanent fixture. What she didn't realize was that I'd already seen her blueprint. Literally. A disgruntled worker, who was fed up with Karen changing her mind every 3 hours and yelling about tile vibes, had slipped me a photo of the project plans. And those plans included a patio on my grass. That's when I decided to stop playing defense. I filed an official complaint with the county, which triggered an immediate inspection order. According to the documents I had, Karen's permit only allowed construction on her side of the property, which, when measured properly, left her just enough space for a plunge pool, not a backyard resort. But she dug 4 feet past that limit. The inspector arrived in a dusty pickup, measuring wheel in hand, and took 15 minutes to confirm exactly what I'd already known. I watched from my deck as he shook his head, took pictures, and said something to one of the workers, who promptly stopped what he was doing and walked off the site. Karen came flying out of her back door like a flamingo on roller skates, demanding to know what was going on. I couldn't hear the conversation, but from her exaggerated hand gestures and the increasingly red tone of her face, I guessed it wasn't going her way. She stormed over to my fence about an hour later, red-faced and waving a wrinkled paper. "You tattled," she accused me, as if we were children in elementary school. "You just cost this neighborhood a beautiful upgrade." I calmly explained that she was violating property lines, building without proper approval, and forging communications to justify it. She denied everything, of course, including the forged email, even though I had digital forensics proving she used a template editing app to create it. "It's not my fault the original maps were unclear," she huffed. "Besides, what do you even use that part of the yard for? Letting weeds get sunburned." I told her again, politely but firmly, to remove the structure immediately or face consequences. That night, Karen responded in true Karen fashion. She doubled down. Floodlights lit up her backyard like a stadium, and workers returned at 10 p.m. to keep laying tiles. She even put up a plastic barrier around the site, hoping to delay further inspections. When I tried to document it, she had the nerve to shine a strobe light toward my camera to distort the footage. The next morning, I found a note taped to my mailbox that read, "You can't stop progress." It wasn't signed, but it didn't need to be. The font alone screamed scented candle and passive-aggressive Pinterest boards. So I called the concrete guy. His name was Ramon. I'd helped him out during a remodel project last year when the HOA falsely accused him of operating without a license. He owed me a favor. When I explained what was going on, he laughed and said, "Let me guess, she drinks from a straw even when it's just water?" I told him I needed 3 trucks. Fast-drying. Discreet. He paused and then said, "We can be there Monday morning. Want a receipt for her too?" That weekend I kept things quiet. I didn't argue. I didn't report anything else. I just watched. Karen was hosting a pool-themed soft launch party Sunday afternoon, complete with a fake ribbon cutting and an actual DJ in her driveway. I heard her telling guests that the pool was 95% done and ready to use once the guy next door stops throwing a tantrum. The inflatable swan floating in the unfinished concrete basin was the last straw. Early Monday morning, before the sun crested the hill, Ramon's trucks backed up into my driveway. His crew moved like a pit crew at a racetrack, efficient, precise, silent. They poured a fresh batch of concrete into the illegal portion of the pool. Not the whole thing, just my side, with a clean, flat surface that looked professionally finished. We smoothed it over, added a few decorative stones, and signed the bottom corner with a steel plate that read "Private Property" and "No Trespassing." Then we left. By the time Karen woke up, the crime was already cleaned up. She came out mid-morning in a silk robe, smoothie in hand, and dropped it when she saw the hardened slab of concrete gleaming under the sun. She screamed, shrieked, and then tried to blame the workers, claiming it was sabotage. But by noon, she had a certified invoice in her mailbox, for materials, labor, and land use. Addressed from my LLC. Signed and stamped. She had 30 days to pay. Or face small claims court. Either way, the pool was no longer a pool. It was a monument to her entitlement. And the best part? I wasn't even close to finished. Karen didn't take the cement slab lightly. The moment she realized what had happened, she exploded. Her wails could be heard across the block, waking up neighbors who had been graciously spared from her construction chaos until now. She stood at the edge of the pool, or what was now half a pool and half a driveway pad, and screamed into the morning air like a soap opera villain realizing her evil plan had backfired. I watched from my kitchen window, calmly eating scrambled eggs and drinking coffee as if it were a normal Monday morning, because for me, it was. I had simply reclaimed what was mine. For her, however, it was an all-out war. By noon, she had posted on every social media platform and HOA bulletin board about the vandalism committed by her unhinged neighbor. She claimed I had trespassed, destroyed a community project, and endangered local wildlife, because apparently, a rogue squirrel had been sighted near the cement. The lengths she was willing to go to paint herself as the victim were genuinely astounding. But her efforts were unraveling fast. Half the neighborhood had already seen the legal documents I shared with the HOA board and knew she had no legal right to build across my property line. Still, the remaining loyalists, her inner circle of lawn-chair warriors, clung to her story like it was gospel. Later that day, she called the police. I wasn't surprised. I had seen her pacing on her phone in her bathrobe with the kind of urgency that only happens when someone knows they're losing control. 2 officers showed up at my door. They were polite, professional, and slightly amused. I explained the entire situation, handed over my property deed, showed them the survey map, and even provided a USB stick with time-stamped footage of the entire week's events, including the overnight concrete pour, which clearly showed my crew only entering and working on my side of the property. The officers nodded, said it all looked pretty airtight, and left. 10 minutes later, they rang Karen's doorbell. She yelled for 5 straight minutes, waving her arms and pointing toward my fence, but they left her porch with the same amused look they wore earlier. By the following morning, Karen tried a new angle. She called a local news station. I heard her on the phone in the front yard, describing herself as a community leader under attack by a rogue property hoarder. The reporter who arrived an hour later looked thoroughly confused. I watched him walk the fence line with Karen, then again with me. I gave him the full backstory, documents, photos, even the invoice I sent her, and I could tell by his raised eyebrow and quiet chuckle that he already knew where the story was headed. That night, the local channel aired a 30-second segment showing the cemented pool, titled "Neighbor Dispute Turns into Concrete Statement." The comments section online lit up like a bonfire. Most were on my side. Some even suggested I sell the concrete slab as modern art and host wine tastings on it. That coverage was the beginning of a shift. People began to distance themselves from Karen. She had overplayed her hand. One neighbor, Mrs. Patel, who had originally supported the pool idea, walked over with a pie and apologized for voting in favor of the HOA's so-called shared property initiative. She said, "I didn't know she was lying about the boundaries. She made it sound like you two had agreed." I told her it was fine and offered her coffee. She took one look at the slab and shook her head, laughing. "She really thought you'd let her get away with this?" Karen, however, wasn't ready to surrender. Not even close. She filed a formal HOA complaint against me for unauthorized landscaping that disrupted community harmony. The complaint read like a poorly written novel, accusing me of weaponizing concrete, intimidating construction workers, and damaging her emotional well-being. I knew it was a bluff, but the HOA had to go through the motions. They scheduled a hearing in the clubhouse the following Saturday. Karen showed up dressed like she was headed to a courtroom drama audition, wearing a blazer and heels, dragging a wheeled cart with color printouts and a fake architectural rendering of the pool completed. I brought 3 items: my deed, the invoice, and a thumb drive. The meeting began awkwardly. Karen launched into a theatrical speech about vision, growth, and how she had tried to bring waterfront elegance to the community. She even claimed I had originally offered to be part of the project but turned against her out of jealousy. I didn't interrupt her. I waited. When it was my turn, I kept it simple. I laid the deed on the table, played the footage showing her workers crossing the line repeatedly, and handed the board copies of the official county maps and cease and desist letter. The room went quiet. A few board members exchanged looks. One of them, an elderly man named George, finally said, "Karen, this is illegal." She fumed. Her face turned crimson. She snatched up her folder and stormed out of the clubhouse, declaring that she would take it to the top. A few days later, she made good on that promise, or tried to. I received a letter from her lawyer. It was filled with dramatic language accusing me of property sabotage, harassment, and financial obstruction. I passed it to Mr. Hopkins, who laughed so hard I thought he was choking. "There's no case here," he said. "But if she wants to sue, let her. We'll counterclaim and ask for damages. If we're lucky, she'll cover your next vacation." I was tempted to let it play out in court just to see how it would crash and burn, but Hopkins sent a strongly worded response that made it clear we were ready. We heard nothing back. Apparently, Karen's attorney realized within minutes that her story wouldn't survive contact with an actual judge. Now that her legal options were drying up faster than the cement in her half-pool, Karen turned to one last desperate move: retaliation. I woke up one morning to find graffiti on my fence. Not the kind done by teenagers with too much time and too little talent. This was passive-aggressive vandalism. Someone had spray-painted the words "Landhog" in bright pink letters. I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was so childishly ridiculous that I couldn't help myself. I reported it to the HOA and filed a police report just to keep record. Karen denied it, of course. Claimed it was, probably local teens. But the pink paint matched the color of a leftover party balloon still stuck in her tree from her failed pool launch. And let's be honest, no teenager would choose the words "landhog." That had Karen written all over it. By this point, most of the neighborhood had completely turned on her. People stopped waving when she walked her dog. HOA board members began privately reaching out to me, expressing regret and offering support. One even suggested we propose a new rule requiring all future projects to receive notarized neighbor consent when close to property lines. Karen had become the cautionary tale of the block. And I, to my own surprise, had become the quiet hero, not because I wanted to, but because I stood up and didn't back down. But I still wasn't done. I had one more thing to do. Something that would not only protect my property permanently, but make it absolutely impossible for Karen to ever try something like this again. Because while the slab of cement she now stared at from her living room window was a constant reminder of her failed conquest, I was ready to turn it into something far more permanent and far more humiliating. And all it would take was a few permits, a few custom signs, and a new lawn addition that no one would ever forget. The war wasn't over, it was just evolving. And I had the blueprints ready. It was a quiet morning, the kind that almost made me believe the neighborhood had finally returned to normal. The sky was clear, the birds were chirping, and I hadn't seen Karen in 2 days. Not a single lawn drama, not a single urgent HOA bulletin in the group chat, not even a sideways glare from her porch. That alone should have made me suspicious, but instead, I used the moment of peace to put my next plan into motion. I had decided that a slab of cement, no matter how symbolic, wasn't enough. Karen had publicly tried to rewrite property boundaries, use neighborhood politics to bulldoze my rights, and then play the victim when it blew up in her face. It was time to make sure this story stuck, not just in her memory but in the memory of every future board member who might get similar ideas. I began with the sign. I wanted it to be tasteful, legal, permanent, and undeniable. So I ordered a custom steel plaque that read, "Private Property. Illegal Construction Site. Do not enter," in bold, etched letters, complete with a QR code that linked directly to the county records and legal documents showing the parcel lines. I installed it on a decorative post drilled directly into the cement slab, angled perfectly so it was visible from Karen's kitchen window. A week ago, this area was supposed to be her pool's splash zone. Now it looked like the foundation of a museum exhibit about entitlement. But I didn't stop there. I worked with a landscaper I trusted to redesign the section of yard surrounding the slab. I asked for something bold, low maintenance, and unforgettable. We installed drought-resistant plants, solar lighting, and, my favorite part, a row of ornamental boulders that subtly followed the property line. I jokingly called it the Great Wall of Karen. It wasn't just landscaping. It was a living, growing reminder that my land was mine and would never be casually absorbed again. When it was done, it looked like a professional outdoor installation, elegant, structured, and just inconvenient enough to make Karen furious every time she stepped into her yard. The first time she saw the changes, she stopped in her tracks. She had been coming out to pick up a package, and did a full double-take when she noticed the new plants and the sign glinting in the sun. I could see the tension in her jaw from 30 feet away. Her hand hovered over her phone like she wanted to call someone, anyone, but realized that no authority would side with her this time. The documentation was clear. The HOA had already retreated from the issue, and her legal threats had fizzled out. All she could do now was stew in the fact that the land she tried to steal had become the very thing that mocked her. That evening, I received an anonymous message through the HOA app accusing me of intentionally provoking conflict with dramatic property signage. It didn't even use my name. I laughed out loud. Karen was trying to stay involved, but from the shadows. I replied politely and included a photo of the county-issued property stake, stating that all signs were within regulation and protected under zoning laws. I also posted the photo of her original pool construction overlapping into my land, just in case any new neighbors were unaware of the history. The post was shared by 6 other members, all siding with me. One neighbor even commented, "I was gonna install a bird bath, but this is way better." Karen went silent again. Then came the surprise twist I didn't see coming. A real estate agent knocked on my door 3 days later. At first, I thought she was lost or trying to sell me something, but she introduced herself and asked if I'd be willing to speak to a buyer interested in the house next door. I raised an eyebrow. "Karen's house?" I asked. The agent gave a diplomatic smile and nodded. "She's testing the market off the record. Just seeing what interest is out there." I couldn't believe it. Karen, the queen of the block, self-appointed HOA enforcer, and proud pool visionary, was considering leaving. I tried not to look gleeful, but inside I was practically skipping. I asked if the buyers knew about the situation. The agent hesitated, then said, "We're required to disclose boundary disputes if they impact resale value." I smiled and handed her a printed packet with all the details. Not out of spite, but out of transparency. If someone was going to move in next to me, I wanted them to know what they were getting into, or what they were being saved from. The agent thanked me and said she'd pass it along. I never asked what happened next, but I noticed the listing never went live. Whether the buyers backed out or Karen changed her mind, I didn't know. But something had shifted. Her blinds stayed closed. The construction equipment disappeared. Her front lawn, once immaculately micromanaged, began to look slightly unkempt. Then came the city inspector. Apparently, someone had submitted a formal inquiry into the rest of Karen's pool structure. Not me. I was done with reports. This came from someone else, maybe even one of her former HOA supporters who felt betrayed or embarrassed. The inspector left a notice on her door and took photos of everything from the unfinished patio foundation to the improperly stored pool chemicals. Karen tried to intercept him, but I overheard the tail end of their conversation, and it wasn't going her way. She claimed political sabotage. He replied, "We're just following protocol, ma'am." Within days, her backyard was flagged for multiple violations. Watching this unfold, I felt a strange mix of satisfaction and pity. She had brought this on herself. She turned a simple neighborly misunderstanding into a campaign of arrogance, manipulation, and full-scale delusion. And now, everything she had tried to build, literally and figuratively, was collapsing. Still, I didn't dance on her misfortune. I didn't gloat or post memes, though believe me, I could've. Instead, I focused on my own home, my own family, and the peace that was slowly returning to our street. But even peace came with its final punchline. 2 weeks after the inspector visit, I received an envelope in the mail from Karen's lawyer. I groaned, thinking it was another empty threat. But when I opened it, I laughed. It was a settlement offer. Karen had decided to officially abandon her pool project and was offering to pay for the cement removal on her own dime if I would retract the invoice I'd sent her. In return, she wanted no further legal pursuit and an agreement not to publicly defame her. I showed it to Mr. Hopkins, who grinned and said, "Looks like she finally realized the only person defaming her is herself." We drafted a response that was firm but fair. I wouldn't remove the slab. It was legally installed and marked. I also wouldn't remove the sign, because it served as a record of what happened. But I agreed not to pursue the invoice if she agreed to cease all further construction and drop any HOA attempts to influence policy regarding my property. She signed. It was done. A month later, the half pool was filled with soil. A truck delivered sod and gravel. Slowly, the project that started with jackhammers and smoothies faded into the background. Karen still lived next door, but we rarely spoke. Occasionally we exchanged stiff nods. She started spending more time indoors. Her social media posts about community improvement stopped altogether. And the neighborhood? It was quieter. More peaceful. People stopped by during walks to compliment the landscaping on my side. A few even asked if I could help them design similar boundary gardens. I never set out to win anything. I just wanted my land respected. But in the process, I had turned a backyard invasion into a masterclass in standing your ground, literally. And every time I walked past that sign, I remembered one thing: boundaries exist for a reason. Some are marked with fences, some with paperwork, and some, when necessary, with a whole lot of concrete and a little bit of resolve. It had been nearly 3 months since the last cement truck rolled through my driveway, and yet every morning when I stepped onto my deck, the reminder was still perfectly intact. The slab that now marked the edge of my property had become something of a neighborhood landmark. People out for evening walks would pause and stare. Sometimes they'd whisper to one another and chuckle, clearly recognizing the spot from that brief, but viral clip that made the local news. One guy walking his dog even stopped to say, "You're the cement guy, right?" I nodded and he smiled wide. Legend. But what truly surprised me wasn't the recognition. It was the complete shift in the way the neighborhood now interacted with me. For years I had kept to myself, friendly but distant. After the Karen incident, something changed. People saw me differently. Not as combative, but as someone who stood up against absurdity with his head held high and his humor intact. Meanwhile, Karen had all but vanished into her house. Her extravagant backyard renovation, which once buzzed with workers, music, and designer furniture deliveries, now sat in eerie silence. The gravel pit where her half-pool once promised summer glory was now an awkward patch of sod and mulch. No water, no umbrellas, no tiki torches. Just one sad lawn gnome that someone must have returned anonymously, stuck facing my direction like it was watching me for her. She had stopped attending HOA meetings. Word had it that she even tried to step down from her seat, but the board made her finish her term because technically she hadn't committed any criminal offense. It seemed poetic. The woman who used to scream "violation" Every time someone's trash bins were visible an hour early now quietly endured a parade of her own embarrassment. I could have let it all die down and fade away. I could have taken the high road entirely. But there was one last thing I needed to do, not out of revenge, but out of principle. I filed a motion with the HOA to create a new rule. It stated that any future construction project that touches within 5 feet of a property boundary must receive written consent from the adjacent property owner, approved in front of a notary, and submitted to the county office. To my surprise, the board didn't resist. In fact, George, the oldest board member and the only one with an ounce of common sense during the Karen fiasco, seconded the motion before I even finished reading it aloud. The vote passed unanimously. Even Karen, seated in the corner with sunglasses on like she was hiding from the world, raised her hand without protest. That motion became known as the cement rule among some neighbors, and while I didn't love the nickname, I appreciated the sentiment. Just when I thought the story had finally ended, something unexpected happened. A letter arrived addressed to me in a thick cream envelope with fancy calligraphy. For a brief second, I feared it was another legal stunt, but when I opened it, I found an invitation. Karen was throwing a party. A rebranding party, she called it. A new beginning for a more harmonious community. At first, I laughed. The idea that she would host anything again felt absurd. But my curiosity got the better of me. I told my wife I'd just go for 5 minutes, out of sheer interest. She told me to wear sunglasses and take popcorn. The party was awkward from the start. A few neighbors showed up, likely out of politeness, and Karen was clearly trying to channel a more humble, neighborly version of herself. She wore casual clothes instead of her usual overdressed flair, offered lemonade in paper cups, and tried to make small talk with the same people who used to be her HOA enforcers. When she spotted me, something flickered in her expression. Not anger. Not pride. Something like uneasy acceptance. She walked over slowly and, to my shock, apologized. Not in a grand gesture. Not with fake tears. Just a simple, short sentence. I took things too far. I nodded. That was all I needed. I didn't forgive her out loud, but I also didn't remind her of what she'd done. Sometimes the weight of silence says more than anything. That would have been the neat little bow to wrap up the entire saga. But this was still Karen we were talking about. 2 weeks later, she sent out a community poll about reopening her backyard space for communal relaxation purposes, asking if neighbors would be interested in a shared yoga platform or meditation area near the property line. I almost choked when I read it. My phone lit up with texts from neighbors who had seen it and couldn't stop laughing. One message from George simply said, "Your cement better be ready for round 2. But I wasn't worried. I knew it was a final grasp, a weak attempt to reassert relevance without the energy to actually follow through. The HOA board didn't even entertain the suggestion. The proposal disappeared as quickly as it arrived. Life moved on. Slowly but surely, the Karen drama faded into background noise. New families moved in, and I watched as kids rode their bikes past the slab without knowing the legend that lived beneath their wheels. But the older neighbors remembered. They still brought it up from time to time, especially when someone mentioned installing a new deck or gazebo. The cement had become a symbol, not of revenge, but of what happens when boundaries are ignored and assumptions go unchecked. It was never about pettiness. It was about setting a standard. You don't get to take without asking. You don't get to rewrite lines that were drawn long before you arrived with your smoothie and your clipboard. Eventually, I had the slab converted into something useful. With a little modification, I turned it into a sitting area. A stone bench, a bird bath, and a small table with a chessboard embedded in the top. Neighbors would stop by and play, sometimes with their kids, sometimes while sipping tea or reading. It became a little nook of peace, where the chaos once tried to take root. I never put up a plaque saying what had happened there, but the story lived on in whispers and laughs, passed down like folklore. New neighbors would ask and someone would smile and say, "You should ask him. He's the one who filled a pool with concrete. As for Karen, she remained quieter than before. She still lived next door, still tended to her plants, and still occasionally wore those massive hats like she was about to walk a red carpet in her own driveway. But she didn't meddle anymore. She didn't lead the HOA with iron fists and noise complaints. She faded into the background, occasionally seen but rarely heard. And honestly, that was fine. Peace didn't always mean friendship. Sometimes it just meant keeping to your own yard and not pretending the fence didn't exist. In the end, the war over a stolen pool wasn't just about land or concrete or rules. It was about respect, about understanding that some lines aren't meant to be blurred, no matter how determined someone is to rewrite the map. And in standing up for those lines, not with anger but with strategy and just a little creativity, I gained something better than revenge. I gained the respect of a community, the safety of my home, and the reminder that when someone digs into your space without permission, it's okay to pour a little cement and make it permanent. Because some statements, when made properly, don't need to be loud. They just need to last.